The tale started with a joyful goddess. The lovely goddess shut her eyes and welcomed all the brave champions she had called. The pupils gazed at her in puzzlement. They started to glance at each other and yell, not grasping what sort of location this was. The girls grabbed their phones and began shouting, stating that their devices weren't functioning. Looking around, they noticed that the ground was covered in mist. The goddess spread her feathers, stating that they didn't need to be cautious. The whole group stared at the goddess, who explained that, due to the evil lord's return, they were summoned to rescue Fantasia, which was in serious peril because of him. The pupils turned their heads eagerly. The goddess grinned. A lad standing at the back listened as his peers began to shout and get thrilled. Soon, all the champions would be moved to the Fantasia shrine. Inside the shrine, a holy woman was waiting for the champions. She would offer the champions complete heartfelt and practical aid. The last prayed with her eyes closed. One of the lads lifted his hand and asked for approval to pose a query. Hanu grinned and asked if there were ranks, ability displays, and creatures like in games. The goddess placed her hand on her heart and said that it was so. M, who was standing beside the lad, quickly raised her hand, saying that she also had a query. M also grinned, asking if this was a magical realm, if there was an old-time setting, royals and warriors. After getting a pleasing response, the last pondered it. Her peer raised his hand, saying that he had a query. The angel turned to him, granting him approval to ask. Kongman lifted his head and asked if the most remarkable person among them would become a champion. The goddess replied, saying that this wouldn't occur. Raising his hand, the lad asked if it was true that, regardless of their skills, they were all champions, but not all were gifted with strength. Many grew anxious and reflective. The youthful goddess, picturing the other deities, said that only by earning the deities' approval and favor could they be transformed as true champions. Kongman grinned and thanked her for her response. The goddess laughed and said that he was a very bold champion. The young man standing behind him silently thought that he sensed this being had a different manner toward Kongman. The lass raised her hand and asked for approval to pose a query. Bora opened her lips and presented herself as the class leader. The goddess, still grinning, asked what the champion Bora's query was. Raising her hand, the lass said that this realm was in danger and urgently needed assistance. But, since they had been taken away so abruptly, their kin and instructors would be concerned. Lowering her hand, she asked if they could reach them. The goddess, floating in the air, paused. The pupils grew worried and stepped back when the goddess said that it would be tricky. The being laughed, smiling kindly again. She said that, if they defeated the mighty evil lord, the deities who had granted them favor would fulfill their desires. The group of pupils suddenly raised their hands, wanting to ask queries. Nearly all of the pupils raised their hands. The goddess opened her eyes. She carefully answered each query, though as it continued, the responses became less and less thorough. Soon, the group quieted down. The main character pursed his lips, thinking. He raised his hand. The goddess nodded, granting approval. Everyone looked at the lad when he said that it was not a query but a plea. He needed to return to Earth. The goddess's eyes widened. Shutting them again, she said that she had already stated this. If they defeated the evil lord, their desires would be fulfilled. The lad's lips quivered. Bora looked at Kana in shock when he said but he wasn't keen on becoming a champion. Silence fell over the area. The lad, trembling with his entire body, asked not to be told that it was impossible to go back to his planet. The goddess, pondering, said that it was quite doable, but she had to ask him if he would truly abandon a realm where countless lives were on the edge of ruin. Lightning kept striking the ground. The evil lord was seated on his throne. Recalling the face of the lord, the goddess asked why he ignored misfortunes and wished to continue his normal life. Kanyu's head jerked. Clenching his teeth, the lad asked how someone who made his kin worry could save the realm. Bora raised her brows. For her, this guy was too dull. The goddess stopped grinning. The main character clenched his fist when the being asked his name. When she touched his face, the lad said his name. The pupils were thinking when the goddess spoke to them, asking if there was anyone else who didn't want to become a champion. Kinmin and Hanyu laughed. The main character's eyes widened. He was alone near the gateway. No one wanted to join him. The goddess, grinning again, told him that he didn't belong in this place for great champions and should depart now. Kanyu turned to the gateway. He looked back when his peers asked him to greet their parents. Kanyu would surely tell them that they were all awful sons and daughters. The lad entered the gateway. A moment later, he emerged in the woods. The main character trembled with his entire body, thinking that he was tossed far from the academy. The beast stepped toward the lad. Kanyu turned around, thinking that a person was nearing him. The elf shivered. The beast opened its jaws. The creatures holding the elf in their claws approached the main character. Blood was dripping from the elf's mouth. He was unconscious, possibly dead. Kanyu's whole body shook with fear. Looking at the smirking faces of the creatures, he cursed the goddess. Turning around, the lad fled. The events take us to the town of Holy Ones, Prologan. A bright ray of light rushed toward the town. A beam of light burst out of the shrine. After the shine vanished, champions appeared in the shrine. Hanu opened his eyes, hearing a woman's voice. The holy woman approached the champions, greeting everyone who had arrived in the realm of fantasy. The lass grinned. 2 warriors stood near the holy woman. Looking at the fair-haired man, many of the lasses decided that he was a royal. The holy woman introduced herself, saying that, having received a vision from the goddess, she was eager for their meeting. Then she pointed to the fair-haired man beside her, wanting to present him. The swordmaster himself bowed and introduced himself, saying that he was the royal of the northern realm of sword experts. The lass grinned at the sight of him being joyful. The holy woman, looking at the servant, said that the princess was delayed. Suddenly, the princess rushed into the hall, saying that she overslept because she drank too much the night before. The priestess, grinning, said that honesty was both her asset and flaw. She shouldn't have said the last phrase. Athena stumbled over her own foot. Everyone stared at the lass in surprise. Athena's crown slipped slightly. The lass, sitting on the floor, said that the floor in the shrine was too slick. It was bound to happen because she had never tripped on her way here before. The princess saw how these champions looked at her. The lasses grinned when the school kids shouted, calling her charming. When Athena stood up, the holy woman said that this lady was the princess of the Archmish realm, south of the shrine. She would aid them, the champions, along with Prince Alice. Hanu called the system screen. He smirked, saying that it was as if he was going on a trip with young kids. Looking at his traits, the lad said that everything was clear with the favor, unlike the rest. Tapping at the system panel, he decided to check the champion listed in the favor section. It turned out that he was given automatic translation, and the experience gained from hunting was greatly boosted. The lad frowned slightly, realizing that, without a limit, this would be a cheating effect. Hanu, looking at Kuman's back, silently said that too many people received the same favor. The holy ones grinned when Kan asked her how to gain the favor of the deity. She replied, saying that they must earn the approval of the deity. Each of them has their own likes. Many system screens appeared in the air, reporting about some deities who were communicating with them. Many system messages filled the space. The holy woman, shutting her eyes, said that each deity had their own measures, but they were all searching for the one who would defeat the mighty evil lord. Kong then grinned, placing her hands to her heart. The priestess said that the deities were observing them. They should recall that their focus was not endless. The lad with glasses, raising his hand, asked what to do if nothing succeeded. Grinning even wider, the lass asked him if she should fret about such rubbish. Everyone instantly frowned, the thrill vanished. And so, in a magical realm filled with hopes and dreams, the adventure of the 4 main figures Kong, Min, Hanu, Bora, and me began. The events take us to the woods. The main character ran as fast as he could. The clouds above the lad swiftly changed. The lad leaned against a tree. Sweating, he said that, if he'd known this was going to happen, he would have strengthened up a bit. Something crashed right into a tree. The arrow stuck in the bark. The gnolls caught up with the lad. It didn't take a genius to figure out that such beings didn't exist on Earth. The being who called herself a goddess had tricked Kanu. She had no plan of sending them back. The creature slowly neared the lad. Kanu's eyes widened. He fled again, realizing that if this was a real magical realm, there might be magic here. So, he called up the system screen. Looking at the system window, Kanu asked why the champion was listed in the curse category. After reading the details, he realized that the experience gained from hunting would be greatly reduced and the transfer would only work on hostile races. Kanu realized that the goddess had done this on purpose to get rid of him, because such a penalty in a realm where you can only advance using the game system is just awful. It was as if she was crushing the space with her hands. Kanu gritted his teeth, realizing that he could communicate with these creatures. Turning his head, he asked the gnolls if they wanted to talk to him. The creatures looked at each other and instantly screamed, saying that this meat was speaking. The main character covered his ears, realizing that it was useless to try to make contact with them. Kanu, wary, began to slow down. The creature surrounded the main character. Kanu's eyes widened when he heard an unknown tongue. An arrow pierced his leg. Right in front of him, elves crawled out from behind cover. The lass pulled the bowstring. The lad, falling to the ground, tried to grasp what was happening here. The gnolls, ripping arrows from their bodies, said that the meat of timid elves had come to them. Kanu crawled to the side, deciding that a fight had broken out between fantasy savages. Leaning against the tree, the lad tried to figure out what he should do now, whether he should pray to a deity. The lad clenched his teeth. Touching the arrow, he cursed, asking if he really had no other option but to perish. The unnamed goddess peeked out from behind a tree. She was spying, standing right behind the lad. Kana looked at the gnoll, frowning. He silently said that it was because of the goddess that he was in this mess, so he would not pray to her. Shutting his eyes, the lad decided to accept his fate instead of praying to the deity. The lass sat down beside him. Kanu, having received the alert of the observer, clenched his teeth, asking for aid. The goddess opened her mouth in surprise. Crying, Kanu asked to be saved. Looking up at the sky, the goddess asked why he was alone. The lad, having stopped crying, thought, frowning. He silently said that it was because of the cursed goddess who abducted him. Kanu clenched his teeth, realizing that he could not say such a thing, because if this unknown voice belonged to a deity, he could be a friend of that goddess. The lass clenched her fists, confused. The lad started to move his arms and yelled, saying that he needed aid first, otherwise he would perish from this pain. The lad jerked his head and asked if there was another deity who could aid him. The main character grimaced when the goddess said that there were no other deities here, because she liked the absence of other deities here. Kanu sighed and turned away, asking if she was an outcast. Looking up at the sky, the goddess asked what this term meant. The lad instantly became upset, realizing that he had been very foolish. The lass clenched her fists, ready to teach the lad a lesson. Kanu involuntarily pictured the system screen with a curse. Deciding that he could receive a strange curse again if he explained the true meaning of outcast, the lad frowned and said that an outcast was like a lone wolf roaming through the wilds. The goddess instantly pictured this, and said that she liked it. The main character sighed, relieved that he had not perished. The goddess put her hands on her hips and said that she was an outcast. Kanu grinned nervously and asked to be saved. The goddess grinned and asked if he was also an outcast. The lad turned his head and thought about it. In his life, he had always been an insider, the complete opposite of an outcast. He actively chatted with everyone. But now, pointing to himself, the lad said that he was also an outcast, which is why his friends were called to the shrine and he ended up here. The goddess stood still, listening to his tale. While the gnolls battled and battled, the goddess felt mixed emotions, looking at the lad. Shutting his eyes, the main character said that it was normal for an outcast to aid a fellow. But this did not apply to her because she was a deity. The lad opened his eyes and silently said that he had blurted out nonsense. The goddess stood still and said that all outcasts are the same. She suddenly raised her hand, gathering mana. The mana wrapped around the arrow in the lad's leg. A moment later, it began to dissolve. The main character's eyes widened in shock. The pain that seemed to kill him suddenly vanished. Standing up, the lad thanked the goddess. Looking at the system screen, the lad noticed that, next to the favor, was now written outcast. All conditions except death will be reset for him. However, something awful will happen if the lone wolf leaves the wilds. The main character narrowed his eyes, not grasping what the lone wolf meant. Hiding behind a tree, Kanu asked if he would receive divine punishment if he stopped being an outcast. The goddess replied, saying that she will only aid outcasts. Starting to slowly walk away, the lad silently said that he really has no complaints. Looking at the gnoll with its mouth open, Kanu silently said that he wouldn't be able to talk to them if it weren't for the curse. Although, even understanding them, he can't reach an agreement. Stepping on a twig, the lad said that he was destined to be an outcast anyway. By chance, the gnoll, sharply turning around, screamed, saying that their meal was fleeing. Kanu was fleeing. The creatures, stretching out their hand, angrily said that this meat was too lively. The gnolls neared the lad's back. The lad's eye widened. Thanks to the outcast, all conditions except death were reset for outcasts. The lad sped up, his tiredness gone thanks to the favor. Even if he continued to run at full speed, he would not get weary. The gnolls smirked. They were angry because they were so exhausted that they could not catch up with him. The creature threw a rock. The stone hit the back of the lad's head. Kanu's body weakened. The creatures were glad to see the lad start to fall. Suddenly, the main character stood up firmly. He said with a wide grin that they simply had no chance. Grinning, the lad thanked the goddess, saying that this favor was great and that it was not just empty words. In this situation, not only did his tiredness and wounds vanish, but his mind stayed calm, so he fled calmly. Sad, the lad asked if he should bite his tongue if he was caught. Connor looked up at the sky. When the goddess said that he would not perish from just that, the main character stood at the edge of the cliff. He decided to leap off it because, as long as he was not killed with one blow, even serious wounds would vanish. Looking at the dead deer below, the goddess said that he would not survive if he fell from such a height. Kanu, clenching his teeth, said that she could give him wings or something. At that moment, the nose ran up. Now the lad was facing a cliff, and the creatures were behind him. Kanu frowned, trying to find a way out of this situation. He turned around abruptly, saying that he had an idea that could help them all. The gnolls smirked when the lad said that there were many hungry beings here, but not much to eat. Pointing to himself, the lad said that, whoever caught him first, he would give his tastiest body parts. The gnolls grinned happily. The entire group pounced on the lad, starting to fall with him. A couple of the creatures grabbed him by the throat and shoulder. Their eyes glowed with anger. The huge group fell on them from behind. The main character, barely standing, said that these Nos were obsessed with his flesh, and this was only to their benefit. The lad placed his hand on the creature's shoulder. A moment later, they began to fall. A huge group of creatures began to fall from the cliff. The main character hugged the gnolls and laughed as they called him crazy flesh. The creature screamed as they fell. A moment later, a huge amount of dust rose up. The lad barely opened his eyes. Soon, he was able to fully see the world. Kanyu was lying among the bodies of creatures. He felt like he had been crushed into a pancake. Kanyu stood up, listening to the praise of the goddess. Suddenly, the gnoll raised his blade. The main character, looking at the creature and its status screen, said that the name of this gnoll sounds quite poetic and its rank is higher than his. The lad, opening his lips, asked if he really survived after falling from such a height only because of his high rank. The young man picked up a rock, saying that, since this was an RPG, foes stronger in power and having a high rank will surely give much more experience. The young man swung his rock. Events take us to the statue in the shrine. The holy woman, standing in the middle of the champions, said that they should either advance by gaining experience from slaying beings with status screens, or they should receive a favor from the deities. Hanu, yawning, called it all a waste of time. Ken, then chuckling, silently asked the deity to grant him his favor since he was the gifted being he had been searching for so long. One of the lasses raised her hand, saying that she had a query. Bora, holding a pen in her hand, asked if the deities would watch over them at all times, even when they were bathing or during their natural needs. The holy woman replied by saying that, even during that, they would be observed. The lasses shivered and were shocked. The holy woman, stopping grinning, said that the champions were not just people. They should not judge the deities based on crude human measures. Bora clenched her fists. Then the two male deities informed her that they were not keen on such crude amusement. The girl, shielding her lips with a notebook, inquired if everything was truly fine. Min, gazing at the roof, stated that they would at least offer blessings to those they found more appealing. Grinning, the girl enchanted the two deities who commended her. Abruptly, a radiant orb materialized before her. She was blessed, now she possessed allure. M lifted her arm, delighting in the fresh blessing. Her allure caused Hannah to rouse. Kanan scowled, attempting to conceal his irritation. The fellow with spectacles curiously asked what this ability had to do with vanquishing the demon lord. The warrior, standing aside, quivered slightly. The scent emanating from Min made the opposite gender yield to her. The holy woman, observing the girl, requested her to cease using her blessing. The blonde, smirking, said she didn't know how to halt it. At that instant, the pure goddess declared that she disapproved of improper actions. The holy woman exhaled, stating it was too late. Winking, Min asked for whom it was too late. For the men who fell to her charms, the holy woman, cutting her off, asked her to check her status screen. The girl trembled with her entire frame, noticing the penalty curse in her status. Smiling, the priestess remarked that blessing isn't the only gift the deities can grant to everyone here. They can also place curses on heroes they dislike. Taking a stride, she noted that they hadn't learned about it yet. Nearing Min, she explained that she was just about to clarify it. A handprint emerged on the blonde's back. She cried out in agony as electricity started to zap her. The lightning was gut-wrenching. All the harm and critical hits she took were now vastly amplified. M shut her eyes. Then the male deities departed because now this girl would be overseen by a pure goddess. The holy woman clasped her hands and stated that once she gained a curse or blessing, it would persist until she perished, and the higher the grade of the curse or blessing, the stronger its impact. Min, unable to restrain her tears, said that since a low-grade curse caused such wild pain, it meant she was doomed. Athena, approaching her, urged her not to surrender so fast. Beaming broadly, she said that curses could be offset by blessings, and the pain would also lessen once her body and spirit grew stronger. The princess closed her eyes and soothed the schoolgirl with her grin. The hero picked up a rock in his hand. Wiping the blood from his face, he asked why his rank didn't shift. Looking at the bodies before him, he wondered if it was all due to the hero's curse. Grasping a knife in his hand, Kanyu asked the goddess if there was any helpful knowledge. The girl, folding her arms across her chest, said she couldn't share such a thing. Kanyu, beginning to dash, remarked that just running here is fairly dull. The fellow froze, saying that if he found a person, all would be well. He had to hide behind the shrubs from the gnolls. The goddess, clenching her fist, said she hoped the weak outsider would pass away calmly. Kanyu gripped the knife tighter. The beast raised its head, sniffing something. Two gnolls showed their teeth, detecting blood. Kanyu grinned and cleaned the blood from his face. The beast's eyes shone brightly. He pressed himself to the earth, trying to discern where the scent of flesh came from. The hero, watching the beast searching for him, said he wished to find a human village, but he didn't know which path to take. Hiding behind a tree, The boy noted that there were also many cannibals here. Examining his knife, Kanyu said it seemed like it was only meant for piercing, but its edge was flawlessly sharpened. The goddess, standing behind him, began to pray for him. The boy sliced the vine. Crouching, the boy resolved that just because he was in a magical world, it didn't mean he should only partake in magical tasks. The young man swiftly crafted himself a holder. Smiling, the boy asked the goddess if she understood what centrifugal force was. The null glanced back, sensing something. The hero started to twirl the rock. He spun his homemade flail, aiming to demonstrate to the beast the strength of science. The rock hurtled toward the null. The boy gritted his teeth. His limbs began to tremble with his stamina. If he swung more than twice, he'd be pulled by momentum, and he'd lose his footing. But thanks to the skill, he certainly spread his legs wider. The boy started to breathe heavily. Kanyu laughed, saying that whenever the blessing kicked in, his legs ceased trembling and his breathing steadied. Twirling the rock, the young man said he already grasped how to use this blessing. Now he didn't need to worry about minor injuries and exhaustion. Hurling a projectile at the beast, the boy said that if he simply evaded death, then all would be fine. Having felled one beast, the boy promptly attacked the second. The gnolls, furious, began to toss rocks at him. They chose to delay, waiting for him to tire. The rock struck Kanyu. The beasts immediately charged at him with a yell. One of them stretched out its claw. The hero grinned. It was merely a ruse. The fellow nimbly swung his weapon, striking two foes. Soon, only the hero stood in the clearing. The goddess, nearing him, said he was somewhat strong. The gnoll flinched when the fellow told him to move if he didn't want to feel even more pain. Standing before him, he told him to reveal where the people dwell. The fellow was mirrored in the beast's eye. He was startled by the talking meat. The beast promptly pointed in one direction. The fellow, parting his lips, asked what type they were. The gnoll, lifting its head, called him foolish. Winking, he said he was a gnoll. Then he pleaded to be spared because he answered all the queries. Kanyu beamed widely and thanked him for the details. A moment later, he hit him on the head. The hero, standing before the corpse, said he promised he wouldn't harm him too much if he answered all the queries, but he never said he'd spare him. The goddess, raising her arms, said it was a null. Kanyu snapped, saying he had already figured it out himself. A null was half human, half beast, a figure that often appears in fantasy tales and games, usually akin to hyenas. The goddess, nearing Kanyu, said the young beasts were quite adorable. The boy, thanking her for the vital information, asked why he was still at the same rank after slaying so many of them. The events returned us to the shrine. Elsus, placing his hand on his hip, said that full-scale practice would start tomorrow. Pointing to the princess, he said he'd teach swordplay and Athena magic. Hanu, standing behind everyone, chuckled and asked if they could skip classes entirely. The prince turned his head and said that if he thought they didn't need the lessons of the finest in swordsmanship and magic, then that was his decision. Smiling, Hanu asked if he could leave the shrine during their free time. Kemen glanced at his friend with a smirk. The latter glanced at him and also laughed. At that moment, the deity behind Hanu showed curiosity about him. Sitting on the bed, the boy with 8th grader syndrome said that training was only for minor characters who lacked the skills of a cheat key. The boy thought that while they were practicing, he'd already be the main hero of a fantasy world surrounded by lovely women. The smirk didn't leave the boy's face. Elsus raised his arm. The prince, standing before the heroes, said that those who wished to pursue the path of a knight should follow him. If it didn't match their abilities, they could alter their choice anytime. Placing his hands behind his head, the boy asked the prince where they'd learn magic lessons. Elsa smiled anxiously and said the princess seemed to have drunk heavily yesterday, but she was quite diligent, so she'd arrive soon. The crowd of students gathered when the prince asked them to wait there. Hanu turned, hearing his friends grumble about the lack of a bath and other things there. The boy parted his lips. Among his blessings, there was a new one. Now he was the most unique hero in the whole world. Hanu beamed widely, saying he now had his answer. Meanwhile, Kong, standing before everyone, thought he was the greatest there. The young man began to descend the stairs, saying that if such useless kids worked hard, they could surely rise to the A-rank spot of the hero's rival. Hanu exited the shrine grounds. The events take us to the town square. Hanu, grinning, said he had arrived at the right spot. Standing before the stairs, he said a fantasy tale should definitely begin right there. The fellow opened the door. He entered a room filled with mercenaries. A pair of assassins eyed the young man in surprise. The mercenaries, leaning against the wall, decided this fellow had come to issue a task. The worker, smiling sweetly, asked what brought him to the mercenary guild. The young man, extending his finger, said he had come to sign up as a mercenary. The fellow used the typical route of any hero, a necessity for someone who doesn't want to get tangled in other nonsense. The mercenary beside him was confused. Hanu turned when someone told him this wasn't the place for a beginner like him. The red-haired girl frowned and told him to stop spouting rubbish and go home now. She had seen many reckless fellows like him. They all perished quickly after becoming mercenaries. The girl tilted her head slightly. Hanyu looked at her and decided this was the effect of his blessing. The mercenary scowled and asked the fellow if he was listening to her. The fellow noticed the blade of the beautiful mercenary woman with a curious nature. Looking at her face, he decided she was surely a princess in disguise or a noble of high rank. Hanyu chuckled and mentally said this was the fate of the hero. This was definitely the effect of the blessing. The girl pointed her finger and was about to scold the fellow, but he cut her off, offering to let her join him, since she was so concerned about him. He spread his arms wide and said it was wrong to judge a book by its cover. He laughed and said she had probably faced this many times too. The girl froze. She smiled faintly, saying he had caught her. Hanyu turned, pleased with his uniqueness. Covering his mouth with his hand, he said he couldn't say much about it now, but he was the chosen one. The fellow blushed slightly. At this moment the young deity was roaring with laughter. The mercenary, eyeing the fellow, asked what the powers of the chosen ones were. The fellow replied, saying it was a boost of the main hero. The girl at the counter calmly listened to everything. The events take us to the woods. The null, sprawled on the ground, moaned. He opened his eyes, saying the meat village is in the west, and it's too far. Looking at the fellow twirling his weapon, he said he wouldn't dare deceive such strong meat. Kanu waved his weapon and thanked him for the helpful details. Examining the bodies, he said the beasts were so basic that you could tell right away when they were lying. The hero smiled. He verified the village's location by questioning many nulls. There can be no error now. A frantic fight with the nulls turned into a hunt. Kanu defeated most of the beast's kin. In one night, he went from prey to a skilled hunter. Raising his arm, the boy asked if it was possible this was some kind of hidden gift. The goddess stood behind him, silently observing. Looking at his ripped clothes, the young man said that without the blessing, he'd never have fought like this, because the blessing also helps maintain calm. Raising his arms, the boy was glad he didn't lose his mind after so many grave wounds were dealt to him. The goddess, starting to whistle, muttered, showing her displeasure. The boy, lowering his arms, asked if she wanted him to perish. She replied, saying she didn't care about what was happening. Kanu, stepping forward, said she was too heartless, though it was she who granted him a blessing. The boy turned abruptly. An angry null leaped from the bushes. Kanu seized his knife. Suddenly, an arrow struck a tree near him. The hero glared at the arrow. A group of mercenaries stood before the boy. Kanu clenched his teeth, realizing they couldn't understand each other. The young man decided to stow his knife for now. Gary grabbed the handle of his sword. Suddenly, the hero dropped to his knee. He raised his arms, saying he opposed violence. The boy, lifting his hand, mentally said nothing had changed yet. They still couldn't communicate. However, people connected not only with words. Body language could show a reluctance to conflict in battles. The fellow kept his arms raised. The group of mercenaries glanced at each other. Misa sharply raised her crossbow. Kanu covered his face with his hands. Smiling nervously, he said the otherworlder doesn't bite. He is a friendly resident of another realm. The group of mercenaries trekked through the woods. Kanu looked around. Misa, lowering her scarf, said the fellow's name. Cole and Gary, walking beside him, also began to say something to the fellow. The man winked at him. The hero smiled anxiously. Of course, he told them his name with gestures, but beyond that, he couldn't grasp a single thing they said. Looking at Cole's back, he mentally said it was easier now because there were people beside him, and they didn't shoot at him at the first encounter like elves. The goddess, following the fellow, was annoyed. Puffing out her cheeks, she said he didn't behave like an outsider. Seeing the fellow with his hands behind his head, she started to grumble about him not speaking to her casually. Kanu, gazing at the sky, mentioned that it was fine to chat informally when folks get closer. The goddess quickly replied by telling him to stop acting like they were buddies. Kanu, glancing at the crowd, said that he met them and could only talk to a deity. Gary tapped the fellow on the shoulder. The man was the chief of the group. He held a massive blade in his hands. He never displayed the tiniest sign of tiredness. Staring at the old man's muscles, the fellow wondered how powerful he was. Cole spun around. He embraced the hero, beginning to say something to him. This fellow had a sturdy frame and wielded 2 swords. The last poked her finger at the shoulder. She pointed upward and said something. This woman was the one who struck from afar using a crossbow. This enormous crossbow was not originally meant to battle people. The hero looked far off when the last pointed there. The young fellow spotted smoke in the distance. Standing on the cliff's edge, the lad said that if this smoke wasn't from a forest blaze, then it must be a chimney. Grinning broadly, the hero said that he finally found a spot where people dwell. Seeing Kanu grinning, the goddess said that he wasn't behaving like a stranger. She turned away from him, saying that he was too bold. The hero, staring at the sky, said that he was just pretending that they got along. After all, he needed to escape this forest. Gary suddenly grabbed the handle of his blade. Misa took the crossbow in her grip. Cole also glanced behind him. Kanyu froze puzzled. A huge mob of gnolls charged toward them. They opened their jaws wide. Gary held his blade in front of him. The hero smirked, seeing the number of foes. Kanyu, grabbing the dagger in his grip, said that it was the first time he had seen such a big heap since the event on the cliff. The two swordsmen dashed forward. The large man swung his blade. Cole leaped onto his shoulder. He jumped right into the throng of creatures. The mercenary swung his blade. The two swordsmen found themselves encircled by creatures. Smirking, the gnoll said that the big meat would soon tire. An arrow pierced the creature's eye. Misa frowned, loading the bolt. She raised her crossbow. A moment later, the bolt pierced another gnoll. The lass took the bolt. She clenched the bolt with her teeth. So, Misa began to reload her crossbow. She looked back in fear. The gnoll was right beside her, wanting to rip her apart. Cole, seeing this, yelled. The hero swung his dagger. Connor stood before the creature and asked the deity of the outsider to understand that man is a social being. The creature's eye gleamed. Its paw rushed toward him. Kanyu nimbly leaped, dodging the creature's strike. A moment later, he plunged his dagger. Then the goddess said that she didn't care about his emotions. Kanyu, standing tall, said that this was also true. Smiling, he said that the creatures were gathering around the first level him. Gary and Cole stood aside watching the fight. The hero, looking at the body, said that everyone was safe now. The swordsman turned around suddenly. The hero, grinning widely, said that if it weren't for them, he would have been in trouble. Suddenly, Misa aimed a crossbow at him. The lass closed her eyes when the fellow said that she must be joking because he was shielding her from the gnolls. An arrow shot out of the crossbow. A moment later, the lad's chest was struck. Kanyu fell to the ground. The events in the forest continue. The group of mercenaries stood in front of the body. Cole, looking at the lass, said that she did a fine job. Because of those gnolls, their scheme failed. The lass, having stopped smiling, said that thanks to the creatures, they were able to learn how dangerous the foe was. It seemed that the lad was weak. Besides, he kept babbling in an odd tongue, but he fought the creatures much better than they expected. Gary closed his eyes and said that it would be risky if they stuck to the original plan. Cole chuckled and said that it was a bit of a pity, but it couldn't be helped, and he would hardly have willingly agreed to be sold into servitude. Kainu was lying on the ground. Gary raised his hand and suggested taking the dagger he had used. Since they were no longer selling him into servitude, they should take everything they could. Kainu gripped the handle. The man smiled and said that something might be more precious than they thought. The swordsman sighed and laughed along with Misa. The old man pointed to the dagger and said that this relic belonged to the royal kin of the elves. And even if it was a fake, it was worth a lot. Cole, hearing this, approached the body. He bent over him smirking. The lad said that this young fellow, even in death, did not let go of his weapon. Misa raised her hand and shouted, saying that she had hit the foe in the chest, but not in the heart, and that he might well be alive. Cole raised his blade, saying that it was easily fixed. A moment later he lowered his hands. The swordsman frowned. A system panel appeared above the fellow's body. There were two ways to see someone else's status panel. Either someone shared it themselves or you had a special gift. Cole's eyes widened in horror. There was a condition for the status panel to be visible, namely, the target had to be alive. The hero tightly clutched his dagger. A moment later, he plunged the dagger into the foe's throat. Gary grabbed the blade and yelled along with Misa. The swordsman's body began to slowly sink. A moment later, he fell down. Gary, pulling out his blade, asked what was wrong with his fellow. His hands began to tremble. The man was too weary from the recent fight. The hero was next to him in a second. He swung his dagger, striking his throat. Suddenly, an arrow pierced his chest. The lad grabbed the bolt. The lass's whole body began to shake. Her legs trembled as she took a step back and begged for forgiveness for the error she had made. Kanu began to walk toward her. The lad soon reached her. The archer fell to the ground pleading for mercy. Kanu, staring at her intently, said something. The archer, smiling nervously, said that she didn't understand anything he was saying. Looking up at the sky, she screamed, begging for mercy. The hero, looking at his garments, said that he couldn't believe that she was shooting something so deadly at another person. Putting on his new gear, the lad said that it wasn't very comfortable. It was probably a woman's size. The goddess, watching him, laughed, saying that she respected his interest. The lad, adjusting his garments, said that it wasn't an interest. Only the lass of the three had the right size. The armor that the other two were using was too bulky and heavy. Kanu, picking up the crossbow, said that it was worth taking along. Glancing aside, he said that he still didn't understand why they attacked him. But at the last second he was able to briefly see their status panel. Misa was level 6 and had a gift, although she was not a champion. When the goddess asked what he was going to do next, The lad said that he was going to the hamlet as planned. He took a sack of coins in his grip. Stepping toward the forest, the lad said that he received enough payment and perhaps he could do something with this amount. The goddess reminded him of what happened when he tried to stop being a loner. The events take us to the shrine. Athena, standing in front of the pupils, said that first of all, she must teach them the basics of sorcery. She smiled broadly and said that in the distant past, there was no sorcery on the land. The lad grinned and told his friend that it was all about practical use. He had read about it in a book. Using mathematical figures, one could become a master. One of the lads adjusted his glasses, saying that he had purposely kept his purity, knowing that this day would come. His friend laughed, saying that it wasn't on purpose. The schoolgirl smirked and said that chemistry was sorcery, so she would show them the first ever fantasy sorcery of an atomic bomb. Bora turned his head and told them to stay quiet, otherwise they would distract others from the lesson. The lass thought, looking at her classmates, who said that sorcery also depended on skill, and one could not become a master mage by listening to history. Athena clapped her hands. She looked at the glum and unhappy faces, saying that skill was indeed a very important thing. Smiling, she said that since skill was crucial when it came to sorcery, an explanation about the creator of sorcery was necessary. The pupils in front of her became restless, many of them not listening to her. They all stared at the princess intently as she said that sorcery was a field where skill was more important than anything else. She formed a flame in her hand, saying that what determined one's skill was their inborn lineage and gained scholarly ties. Continuing to smile, the princess said not to forget this. Raising her hand, the lass said that the main part of sorcery was still skill, and this was determined by inborn lineage and gained scholarly ties. The pupils, with their mouths slightly open, listened to the teacher's words about her being a direct heir of Archid Shia, who was the 12th follower of the creator and her third spouse. Smiling, she also noted that she had both a lineage and scholarly ties, and when someone in the crowd asked how they would manage without such ties, Athena replied that everyone in this room would maintain a scholarly tie with her, and that by becoming her pupil, all pupils would be able to reach their full potential. The pupil, raising her hand, apologized for interrupting an important explanation, and asked if she could ask a question, to which she received a positive answer. With her mouth slightly open, the lass asked if it was possible for a person without a lineage and scholarly ties to become a sorcerer. The pupil, without turning around, listened to the pupil's questions about whether it mattered at all because, in the end, they all started with a good scholarly tie. The teacher covered her mouth with her hands and stayed silent. Suddenly, smiling widely, she exclaimed that such a thing was possible. Grabbing the lass's hand, she said that she would tell her about it later. Still holding her hand, she asked the name of the speaker. Closing her eyes, Athena said that from this moment she was establishing a bond between the master and the pupil of Bor. Suddenly, some tiny specks began to appear around the pupil. The sorcerer summoned 2 pink seals and said that she recognized her as the first pupil of the master mage Athena. The other pupils turned around, their eyes wide open. The pupil fell backward while the teacher was talking about how she needed to take an oath using sorcery. The lass's eyes began to close when she said that she was swearing. Suddenly, her body glowed the same pink color. Her eyes closed. Opening them slightly, she heard words of praise from the teacher. Smiling, the master explained that from this day on, she was a full-fledged sorcerer. Adjusting her hair, the pupil asked again because she didn't understand what the teacher was talking about. Raising her fingers, Athena explained that she had originally forgotten to mention that the one who became a disciple earlier would receive more inherited skill. Looking at the system panel, the pupil read that once they became a teacher and a disciple, she had a C-rank gift and asked if this was the gift that the master had mentioned, to which the master replied in the affirmative. The message stated the core of sorcery, and Athena's voice was heard immediately, saying that if a pupil did not have parents or teachers with the gift of sorcery, then even with hard work, they would not be able to become a sorcerer. Lowering her hand, she asked the pupil if she now understood why skill was so important, to which she replied in the affirmative. Closing his eyes, the teacher said that she should return to the first question then. Suddenly, a flame appeared in her hand. Still holding the fire in her hand, she explained that the creator, who became the deity of sorcery, left behind a gift so that her heirs and future pupils could learn sorcery more easily. Suddenly, a huge fireball appeared above her as she explained that an ordinary sorcerer could use sorcery easily and effortlessly with the help of a gift, adding that it was called white sorcery. All the pupils looked at her with their eyes closed. Suddenly, she raised her other hand. A purple flame began to appear on her palm. Suddenly, the princess's hand began to shake. The glove on her hand began to tear. The pupils, their eyes wide open, shouted at her that something was wrong with her hand. Smiling, the lass reminded the pupils of their question about whether skill was always necessary for sorcery. Bora, with her mouth closed, watched what was happening. Standing in front of a group of pupils, she explained that her right hand held white sorcery, which was used through a gift, while her left hand held black sorcery, which was used without a gift.